When Russell T Davies was announced to be returning to Doctor Who all the way back in 2021, the fandom rejoiced. The man who had brought the show back from the grave to experience a new golden age between 2005 and 2010 was returning at a time when the show's future felt more uncertain than ever. The vibes were good. 5 years later, and 3 anniversary specials, 2 seasons with 9 episodes apiece if you include Christmas outings, and a sexy Sea Devil spin off, and the vibes are less good. Part of this is just the fandom's natural desire to mercilessly bash the new thing whilst looking back with rose tinted glasses. It happened with RTD1, the Moffat era, and the Chibnall era. However, this vibe shift hasn't necessarily just been people not dealing with change, or the ever-pervasive and exhausting anti-woke crowd. It's come with a feeling that the show is off somehow. And just before we start, I did really like the majority of what we got in RTD2. Obviously, I do have issues that I'm going to get into here, but for the most part, I really had a lot of fun. But again, that's not to deny the fact that there are some rather fundamental issues at the heart of the show during the RTD2 era. So let's deal with the title of this video. What is the biggest mistake of the RTD2 era? What is the biggest thing holding this era back from greatness? The answer to that question is to ask another. Where are the chairs? If RTD2 is about anything, it's about the Doctor regressing into old habits. They may have gone through a form of therapy with 14, but that hasn't stopped them from having attachment issues.
You have to be mysterious all the time. That's why everyone leaves you. That is why you were always alone.
He doesn't reciprocate Ruby's "I love you" in Empire of Death. He is still bouncing from place to place without taking a breath and struggles to let Belinda see behind the masks he is putting up. He scans both Ruby and Belinda without their consent in the same way prior incarnations have done, such as 11 trying to ascertain whether Amy was pregnant. There is something here and room for growth in the Doctor's character. Both Ruby and Belinda should serve to help him move past these attachment issues, as well as to help him connect with them fully as people, as much as he serves to broaden their horizons and their own arcs. And this is where the chairs come in, because it baffles me that we had 2 seasons with Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor, and at no point was any furniture added to the TARDIS. And this isn't an idea I've just randomly pulled out of a hat. This is a thread repeatedly brought up throughout this era in relation to how the Doctor relates to the people around him. When 15 first enters the TARDIS in The Giggle, one of his first responses is to tell David Tennant that, as an externalization of him being burnt out, there are no chairs there. 14 just hasn't given himself that time to rest and sit.
One thing you need in this place is a chair.
I'll be alright.
No. You're thin as a pin. Love.
Part of how 15 characterizes 14's healing journey is for him to just sit, relax, and connect with the people around him. And that's what we see in the final garden party scene, where he spends the entire time just sitting down and connecting with his found family. But for all that healing, 15's flaw feels like he should be struggling with connection. Despite him immediately calling out the lack of furniture on the new TARDIS set, by the time of the Church on Ruby Road, the Doctor hasn't added any himself. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I like the idea of showing that therapy and getting better isn't necessarily a linear journey. For all the time 14 spent, depending on how bi-generation is supposed to work, healing with the nobles, he's still fully unable to detangle himself from those isolationist behaviours. He, as a functionally immortal being, knows that he will outlive his roster of companions. And as the Toymaker recently reminded him, he's suffered a good few losses recently, especially having been downgraded to the last of the Time Lords yet again. And so it feels like we should have these issues manifest as the Doctor feeling hesitant to make the TARDIS feel like a home for his companions. He should still be hesitant to let his companions travel with him long term out of concern for their safety. And we can kind of see this idea in the way the TARDIS set is treated between the events of the Giggle and the Church on Ruby Road. Once 15 takes control of the TARDIS in the Giggle, he immediately switches the roundels to bathe the interior in a nice warm glow, making it immediately a lot more cosy and homely than the clinical white it had been set to under 14's ownership. Here is 15 immediately coming out of the therapy that the bi-generation is supposed to be, making the TARDIS his home. But of course, he is kind of regressing, so when Ruby enters the TARDIS in the church on Ruby Road, it's back to its clinical cold white, and this remains the default. Whilst we do see alternative colourways in Boom and both parts of the finale, it stays that stock white. And again, I think this works if it is saying what it looks like it is, if Ruby is indeed being kept at an arm's length, as 15 outright says in his Joy to the World rant. Especially in her departure, coming back to the stock white makes sense. The Doctor has built this connection that is now being lost, so the TARDIS returns back to its unhospitable white state. However, this doesn't really track as the thread being pulled on. We don't really feel a sense of development in either Ruby and the Doctor's relationship or the TARDIS as a set throughout the season. What made RTD's first run so strong was his strong grasp on his characters. For as much as you can criticise his plotting even then, the emotional arcs of his characters and the relationships between them is tight. So forgive me for giving a slightly unoriginal critique, but in Season 1, Ruby and the Doctor are just immediately besties. There's little to no conflict in their relationship, and the arc of their dynamic is flatter than anything. If the Doctor's arc is him learning to trust himself with companions again, then we should be expecting him to hold information back, not let Ruby kind of see his interiority, and to keep her at an arm's length. And yet, within the first 2 episodes of the season proper, the Doctor has exposited most of his backstory, explained that he is the last of the Time Lords, and told Ruby about Susan and his family. In front-loading that information for a supposed new audience, RTD front-loads that exposition for Ruby, and as such there's no sense of mystery or holding information back. This feels like information that should be teased out over the course of the entire season as Ruby and the Doctor grow closer and as the Doctor feels more comfortable with Ruby. Part of this just comes from Millie Gibson and Ncuti Gatwa's natural chemistry. It's very clear that they became very close friends over the course of shooting this season. But the writing is giving nothing to offset this by any great margin. It feels like they've known each other a while, right from the very start. They immediately hit it off and that never changes. Neither character really helps the other develop emotionally. Functionally, there's just not much of a character arc in here. I'm not going to say that there's not any kind of attempt to show the Doctor being at least a little bit evasive, but it's very slight. And again, this immediate familiarity is backed up by the TARDIS lighting in the Devil's Cord and Rogue, both of which have more dynamic lighting, which makes the place feel more homey. But still no chairs, and this is of course offset by the set returning to its white lighting throughout the season with seemingly no rhyme or reason. If this isn't meant to be the Doctor regressing, then the TARDIS not being a place that the Doctor and Ruby can sit and call home is an issue. Because if the Doctor has healed, why has he not resolved his immediate problem? But clearly the Doctor is meant to be regressing, at least a little bit. He still has attachment issues and is keeping Ruby at an arm's length as they cut out his "I love you" back to her, as we can see in the scripted version of Empire of Death. If there was an emotional arc to this season, it feels like it should be the Doctor kind of keeping Ruby at a little bit of a distance for half the season, then coming round to accept her for the other half as his bestie and letting her in. And then, upon her departure, you can have him regress again and fail to respond to Ruby because of his issues around companions exiting his life. I feel like we really should see the TARDIS becoming more of a home to Ruby until her exit when we see it return to the stock white. But as it stands, it kind of flip-flops so much that it's difficult to have a handle on. We should see the Doctor add some chairs for them to sit and chat on between adventures, and then when she leaves, leave an empty chair. But we don't get that. And it's interesting that the episode that had the most conflict between the Doctor and Ruby was written by Stephen Moffat, who would then go on to write the next piece of the chair mystery in Joy to the World. In Joy to the World, we have the Doctor once again calling out his lack of chairs when he's calling himself and his problems out.
Do you know how alone you are? You live in a great big giant spaceship and there aren't any chairs, and you haven't even noticed because nobody ever comes round.
Oh my god, I don't have any chairs.
And as the episode develops, he's forced to stay on Earth for a year and wait. Here we get a really nice sequence of events as the Doctor slowly connects and bonds with Anita, culminating in this.
Anita? Have a chair.
You what?
Sit down with me.
Have a chair.
And thus they start having chair nights, where they sit and bond. All thanks to the reliable chair. Once again, the episode starts with the TARDIS set to its clinical white lighting mode and absolutely barren of furniture because he's companionless. We're being presented with a clear divide between a doctor without chairs and thus people to sit in them, and a doctor with a chair to offer. His room in the hotel is lit warmly, it looks cosy and inviting, as does the chair. This chair is what the TARDIS is lacking, what his life is lacking. He even points to this chair as being something that made this year bearable in his final conversation with Joy.
Doctor, you stayed in that room for a year.
That wasn't so bad. Nice chairs.
Chairs, then, are an integral part of this episode, and Moffat, in the same way RTD did in The Giggle, is pointing out how important chairs are to building connection and keeping you grounded. And so we reach the end of the episode. We don't re-enter the TARDIS before the credits roll, but with his connection with Anita over the past year, perhaps this is the moment he gets some furniture for the TARDIS, and learns that he needs some TARDIS chair nights to properly connect with his companions. Perhaps he would even add the exact same chairs he had in the room he loved so much. And so we reach the robot revolution, and no chairs, same bright white lighting. He's back to his old ways, with not much in the way of growth from Anita or Ruby. He once again scans a companion's DNA and uses his charm in a way to seduce Belinda into being his companion, even after Sasha 55 just died in front of them. But Belinda sees right through this and rightly calls him out.
God, you're dangerous.
His actions here are manipulative and a facade. His relationship with her would ultimately be built on a falsehood. Again, this is fine. It's frustrating that he doesn't feel like he's learned from Joy to the World, from what Joy said from those chair nights, but the logic of the staging of the scene is sound. The lighting and lack of furniture in the TARDIS shows how fake the Doctor's charm is here. The TARDIS isn't warm and inviting, it's cold and clinical. This isn't a place that Belinda is just willing to take off in and make her home with the Doctor. It's ultimately empty. So, once again, it feels like the emotional core of the season should feel like the TARDIS slowly feeling more and more like a home for Belinda. She's wary of the Doctor, but grows to have an affection for him, and wants to stay on the TARDIS with him. But we don't really get that. After Lux, the second episode of the season, most of their conflict is gone. By the time the Doctor tortures a genocide survivor in front of her, all she can do is call him wonderful.
You're wonderful.
We don't get any of that slow development in their relationship, and the TARDIS certainly doesn't receive any furniture throughout the season. Though I will say, even if the pacing of their relationship dynamic is a little speedy, the way the TARDIS is lit does a better job for communicating consistent emotionality than in season 1. So excuse me while I take a break from the chair talk to discuss how the TARDIS is lit throughout the rest of season 2. In Lux, as the Doctor and Belinda change costumes, the lighting changes from the classic stark white into a warmer orange. This is smart. This is Belinda's first bit of fun in this space, and as such it feels cozier and more inviting to be in. This warm and dynamic lighting returns in the start of The Well, and again, this works. The Doctor is connecting with Belinda in an authentic and emotional way. He's connecting with her, and this is as safe a space as she can have. And at the end of The Well, with Belinda having almost died, we're back to clinical white. This feels like it's for a couple of reasons. Belinda's once again on the back foot with the Doctor, having almost died, and it feels more like a hospital setting this way. It's far from unintelligent as far as lighting decisions are concerned. In the story and the engine, the TARDIS is once again warm as the Doctor connects emotionally with Belinda about feeling at home in Lagos. However, this is offset by the end of the episode, when, returning to the TARDIS, we find it a stark white, when, as far as the way the episode is written is concerned, these characters should be pretty emotionally close. In the Interstellar Song Contest, we only see the TARDIS at the end of the episode, after Belinda has called the Doctor wonderful, but also after she's found out that the Earth has been destroyed. The lighting as they enter is the clinical white, which is fine. However, it doesn't quite match with where these characters are emotionally at this point in the series. I do say it's fine, because at least then it provides a nice contrast between the white and the dark red it then turns into as the alarm sounds before the TARDIS doors explode inwards for some reason. And then we get to what is maybe the most interesting, but also maybe the most egregious example of the season. As the main plot wraps up, and as the Doctor and Belinda contemplate travelling with Poppy, the interior is once again the stark white. This almost works for me, as this reality unravels and we see kind of the hollowness of it. It kind of works. However, as the scene starts, we get this exchange.
Are you too hot in this pubs? It's always cold in here, but for the first time, it's too warm.
That's the TARDIS accommodating.
The TARDIS is lit in a cold light, but we are told that it's warm. There is a visual disconnect here, especially as the Doctor and Belinda discuss making the TARDIS a home. Had the TARDIS started warmer and then got colder as Poppy disappeared, I think that may have been more impactful, but alas, that was not the case here. And now back to furniture, because this is also the first time we get any sort of furniture on this TARDIS set, because we get Poppy's cot on deck for a while. But then that disappears, and once again this TARDIS is empty. This could be interesting, that the idea of domestic life inside the TARDIS is ultimately hollow, but when it feels like that's been the main goal of the past 2 seasons, it doesn't quite line up. Where is the visual growth here? Adding chairs as the seasons progress, making the TARDIS feel more like a home, it feels like it would be the easiest way to reinforce the Doctor's emotional arc. But we don't see that emotional growth throughout the seasons. Those chairs that the Doctor specifically calls out the lack of never gets resolved. This feels like such a basic, unforced error that I'm still baffled by it a year out from season 2. Why bother including those references to a lack of chairs? Or why bother having Belinda have an emotional arc where she learns to feel at home in this space and have the Doctor emotionally connect with her if you're just not going to resolve any of that? I think the chairs are ultimately indicative of a larger structural issue at the heart of RTD2. I really like a lot of the individual episodes here, but as a whole, RTD2 is a lot weaker than its individual parts. Unlike RTD1, we don't get as much character development and as well-rounded emotional arcs, and as such, the plotting issues stand out way more. Especially as you can feel this disconnect in everything. The inconsistency in performances, the way in which the character dynamics are written, the way the set is lit, and the fact that we still get no damn chairs. If even some of these elements had a better grasp on the emotional through line of the seasons, I think we'd be in a better place. The fact we don't feel like the TARDIS is a home base is one of my bigger flaws with RTD2. We barely spend any time with Ruby and the Doctor in the TARDIS in season 1. In universe, these characters should be spending a lot of time bonding here, especially as they find themselves repeatedly split up throughout the season. I feel like we really needed these domestic moments in the TARDIS to help develop their friendship. Often we start these adventures with the Doctor and Ruby just stepping out of the TARDIS, or already being within the setting of the episode itself. And this carries forward into season 2. Whilst we do get a little more TARDIS interior action due to the overarching plotline of the season, it still feels like we're lacking that emotional and character development that we should be expecting in this domestic space. Even if we did have chairs in this space, the way this era is paced doesn't really allow for time for these characters to sit and chat. It's always rushing off to the next thing. And that's so frustrating when that feels counter to what 14's resolution ended up being. How are we meant to have nice emotional development if we aren't given that time to deliver on it? Even the TARDIS in flight is often limited to just a single warp and they're landed. I don't quite get why we're not spending time in flight just sitting around and chatting. It feels like a real unforced error on their part, seeing as this hasn't been an issue for any prior incarnation of the show. I feel like we really needed chairs in this setting to force Russell to slow the pace down a bit and let these characters connect. We needed chair nights. I want to briefly point out that part of why we never get chairs added, and part of why that domesticity in the TARDIS is never fully realised, is probably in part down to the design of the TARDIS itself. I feel like this is another unforced error on the part of the production. It's an impressive set for sure, and absolutely gorgeous, but it is so empty. There's no little cozy nooks like in practically every other incarnation of the TARDIS. Instead, these spiraling walkways leave massive dead spaces that make it feel just cavernously empty. And because it's all walkways, despite it being so big, it feels paradoxically small. You're really limited to where you can put stuff, and if you do put stuff there, you're blocking walkways. The space they have just feels a little wasted. And it's multi-layered. But we only ever really go up to the wardrobe doorway, and unlike the underside of 11's TARDIS or the upper mezzanine of 12's, there's nowhere to really hang out. Underneath the console, there are only the fairly narrow walkways, the rest is all curved panels with roundels. If you wanted to create a living space down here, there's no space for it. This is a TARDIS that was designed to have David Tennant run around in it, and when it's doing that, it looks great. However, that's a one-and-done trick. As a living space, it's a nightmare. Previous TARDIS designs have also really felt like they complemented the characters of the incarnations that flew in them. From 9's conveying how long he'd been travelling from how aged and coupled together it felt, to the whimsy of 11's and the more scholarly aspects of 12's. I don't really feel like I'm seeing the characters of 14 or 15 here. It's impressive, sure, but I'm not seeing the TARDIS as an extension of them in the same way that I am previous incarnations. This TARDIS was also built to be wheelchair accessible. There's not a single stair in sight. However, this functionality is never utilised. Only able-bodied people exist in this space, though this is probably partly due to Bernard Cribbins' unexpected departure after Wild Blue Yonder. And to be completely clear, an accessible TARDIS is not an issue, it is a good thing. However, one thing that stairs do quite well is provide a natural chair in an environment. In series past, even ones with chairs on a set, we often find characters sitting on steps and having a chat. It's natural and slows the pace just a little by providing the characters a moment to just sit and breathe. But here, unless you were to sit with your legs dangling off a walkway with your head against a railing, there's nowhere to comfortably sit. And so we're always running and the pace doesn't let up. And you can't put a chair or any other furniture in these walkways because then you would actively be hindering the accessibility of these spaces. If you put a chair here, a wheelchair won't be able to get past. Who knows, maybe Shirley Ann Bingham would have been able to come onto the TARDIS in a hypothetical season 3 and they would have needed that space. However, this wasn't a situation that arose in either of the previous seasons, and surely the set could have been designed with space in mind for furniture so that you could do both. And then I must also wonder, how much was the lack of chairs impacted by production issues behind the scenes of the show? It seems increasingly likely that Millie Gibson took a step back from being a lead cast member to a recurring one earlier than intended. The guest writers for Season 2 were given scant details about the Doctor and Belinda's dynamic, which led to inconsistencies in their characterizations and how their conflict was presented. This should have been addressed in the script editing phase, and keeping these characters in line is part of Russell's job description. However, this seems to have just been lost in the mix. And so we start the season back at square one, with a new companion and the Doctor without much emotional growth and still sans chairs. And then we have The Reality War, with its final 23 minutes of reshot material featuring Ruby's reshoot wig. I have to assume that in the original version of the ending, Belinda and the Doctor would have flown off into the sunset to have a wonderful Season 3. With that would have brought inter-season companion continuity, and the chance to build the TARDIS as a domestic space, especially with the increased importance of family dynamics, with Poppy and Susan being a more important element in that proposed Season 3. We may have got chairs in Season 3. But Disney were hesitant to renew for a Season 3, and from the sounds of it, Ncuti pulled out as he didn't want his schedule tied up with an uncertain future. And as a result, the show had to be quickly reshuffled, with the reshoots taking place in February of 2025, just a few short months before the episode itself would air, and the best part of a year after it had wrapped principal photography. As far as anyone can make out, the reshoots begin when the TARDIS crew exit the TARDIS set onto the unit tower and we see Ruby's wig, from there continuing until the end of the episode, with the Billie Piper's head composited onto Ncuti Gatwa's body shot, being shot somewhere around the end of March and the beginning of April as far as we can tell. Again, we see unforced errors on the production team's part. They had a 2-season order but left the story incomplete, expecting a 3rd and 4th season pickup to be all but definite. As such, emotional development like letting the TARDIS become a more domestic space with furniture was left to future seasons. But they weren't definite, and with Disney and Ncuti pulling out, we will never see the culmination of these arcs. This TARDIS set is unlikely to ever get its chairs, and 15 will never move past his attachment issues with his companions. He never even says goodbye to Ruby, like, come on. They should have planned for this eventuality and told a complete emotional story in the 2-season order with the potential for more left open. We should have had chairs by the end of the reality war, is what I'm saying. I think part of why I'm so fixated on these damn chairs is that we still haven't seen a TARDIS bedroom in the revival, and I very much want to. It's just that little bit of domesticity for the companions aboard the TARDIS that we just haven't got to see. And it is important, we see a bedroom in the 3rd story of the original run of the show. I want to see how these characters live in this weird setting, how they make it feel like home. With Belinda especially, has she ended up living in Ruby's old room? How does she feel about that? How does she feel about being forced to live in this place she really doesn't want to? Show me that, damn it. Surely the money allocated to that, 30-second set for Boom could have also been allocated to a semi-standing set for a TARDIS bedroom. Anyway, that's the video done. TLDR, we needed some chairs in the TARDIS. Oh, also, it's very exciting that the chair in the Daleks' master plan is a fun space chair, and not just a normal wooden chair like everyone had been expecting for the past 60 years. And, you know, that's fun. And also goes to show that chairs in Doctor Who are important, actually. Who'd have thought? Yes, my love?
How's it going? I can hear you chatting away.
I'm recording. I'm currently recording. I'm currently...
You on tape?
I'm on tape. You're on tape.
Hello.
Hello. This isn't getting cut out. What can I do for you?
I'm gonna check in.
Okay.